In my paper, Exploitation, Skills, and Inequality, which I've co-authored with Roberto Veneziani and Naoki Yoshihara, one of the main novel features of this paper is that we use a computational simulation framework to analyze the dynamics of exploitation and inequality in the presence of heterogeneous labor, and in our case, very highly heterogeneous labor. Now, using a computational simulation framework is really well suited to examining the interaction of different measures of inequality at the same time. For instance, how does inequality in exploitation compare to conventional measures of inequality, i.e., inequality in income and inequality in wealth? So to take advantage of the computational framework that we've put together, we develop a measure of exploitation intensity. And this measure of exploitation intensity captures the ratio, is basically the ratio of an agent's effective or skill-adjusted labor that they perform to the income that they receive. So this exploitation intensity index gives us a sense of how much one puts into the economy versus how much they get out. Now, this allows us, this exploitation intensity index can be measured, or inequality in this exploitation intensity can be measured using, a conventional tool like a Gini coefficient. So what we're able to do in the paper is to take a detailed look at how the Gini coefficients of the distributions of exploitation intensity, the income distribution and the wealth distribution evolve in an economy where there is accumulation, i.e., the economy is growing over time. Now, typically inequality research focuses on outcomes, market outcomes like income and wealth, right? Those are what we consider outcomes. Now, our measure of exploitation, or exploitation is as a concept, and particularly inequality and exploitation, accounts for both outcomes, i.e., what one gets out of the economy, and what one contributes to the economy. So this is a little bit of a different sense, or a different measurement of inequality. It captures what agents in our simulations are putting into the economy. And this is directly applicable to how we think about real world capitalist economies and workers expending labor power to produce commodities. Now, our work also in this paper highlights how, depending on the structure of the economy and the skills of agents, there may be trade-offs that exist in terms of egalitarian and socialist aims. So in our simulations, the way that exploitation exists and persists is because of a kind of unequal or uneven ownership of wealth or assets. And because exploitation intensity is a ratio of how much labor one puts into the economy versus how much they get out in terms of income, if an agent owns a lot of wealth or has a lot of assets, they can derive capital income. And so they can actually get a lot more out of the economy than they put in terms of their own labor. And now when we start to think about redistribution, egalitarian aims of either equal wealth or socialist aims of eliminating exploitation, we start to encounter some potential trade-offs, particularly in the presence of skilled or highly heterogeneous labor. And so we take further advantage of the computational framework to study a variety of redistributive schemes to see how different methods and different aims in redistribution are going to affect these kind of different facets of inequality and exploitation, income, and wealth. Again, in our paper, my paper, Exploitation, Skills, and Inequality, with Roberto Veneziani and Naoki Yoshihara, one of the things that's one of the ways that this paper goes beyond the existing literature, why it matters, is that at this moment in time, it seems like it's acceptable to start talking about socialism again. This is a term that's coming up a lot more in popular discourse, and there's a lot more room or latitude to start kind of questioning what can be identified as inherent injustices of capitalism. Now, what's typically overlooked or often overlooked in a lot of the existing literature, a lot of these conversations about socialism and just inequality in general, is the fact that property relations, or who owns what, how assets and wealth are distributed, these property relations can be sources of power. And socialism really is about changing these property relations. Now, as I mentioned a little earlier, the exploitation exists and can persist in the simulation framework and the models that we use because of the differential ownership of wealth and assets, and differential ownership of capital, to kind of use the classic Marxian vernacular. Now, this differential ownership of wealth and capital allows some agents in our simulation to extract a lot more from the economy than they put in terms of their own labor. So, this points to the kind of classic injustice of capitalism. This differential ownership of wealth allows for exploitation to exist. There are people in the economy, agents in our simulations, who put a lot more labor into the economy than they get out in terms of their own income. And so understanding these property relations, the ownership of wealth and capital, this speaks to kind of much deeper source of power and injustice in capitalism, and gets a kind of an undercurrent of these more popular discussions about inequality and socialism. And I think identifies a really root cause or determinant of these patterns of inequality that we see, and I think could potentially answer a lot of people's questions or desires for having a society that's a lot more equitable. And so our work really speaks to these topics because it allows a really detailed look at potential trade-offs that exist in different kind of egalitarian and socialist aims, which are also these are topics that come up alongside these popular discussions. So a socialist allocation of wealth would be an allocation where every agent gets out of the economy exactly what they put in. And so this means no exploitation exists. Now, if skills are highly unequal, agents who put a lot more into the economy in terms of their own effective labor, they're going to get a lot more out. And that means that there's going to be inequality in income and wealth. And that might be undesirable to some who might have more egalitarian aims. Now, an egalitarian allocation, or one type of egalitarian allocation, could be equal wealth. Everyone has an equal claim on means of production or on capital. And, if skills are unequal, then there's still going to be exploitation existing, even with equal ownership or equal claims on wealth. So this is where we start to see some of these potential trade-offs. Now, one kind of resolution that we propose to kind of, figure resolving this trade-off is that what's really key is going to be reducing inequality in skills and different agents' capacity to perform labor and how much labor they're able to put into the economy. Now, we might think of this in a real world application as something like an education system that's designed to close, inherent skill differentials, and that's really geared towards ensuring something like equality of opportunity. And so these are kind of a few points that are why I think this work matters, and how it speaks to and goes a little bit beyond where some of these conversations are right now. So some areas for further research that this paper sets up is that, for one, in this paper, while we have a series of many agent simulations, we could always add more agents and get down to a kind of more finely, more granular examination and look at income and wealth inequality. So we have 100 agents. So essentially each agent represents 1% of the income and wealth distribution, or 1% of households. And our models are calibrated to the US. So we could go to 10,000 agents and get down to that top 0.01%, not just the top 1%. of households. So that's one area of extension that could be pretty interesting and add a lot more detail and depth to our understanding of these dynamics of different measures of inequality. We can also examine much more complex scenarios using in the presence of things like technical change. And we could also look at a number of things, different kinds of redistributive schemes that might be of interest. And in addition to that, one further area down the road that could be examined is, kind of much more decentralized or a much more kind of agent-based approach, where agents, instead of focusing on kind of the equilibrium dynamics of exploitation like we do, we could allow for more decentralized interaction between agents and look at how inequality and exploitation or other things might look in a much more agent-based type of framework with a lot more complexity and complex interactions between agents.